Hi and welcome to my video. I'm Farah if it's your first time here. I actually don't think have I even ever said my name on one of these videos? I don't think so. These are all the books that I read in 2022, part one. The reason why I'm doing two parts is because one, I haven't finished reading all the books that I'm gonna read this year, so I'm probably gonna film the next one like really when I know I'm done reading my books for this year. The second one is this would be a extremely long video if I made them all in one part, and it would just be like so much to edit and I would just rather break it up for me. I'm just gonna go in order from how I've read them. I keep track of how many books or what books I read throughout the year from Goodreads. This is my first year doing this. This is kind of fun because I haven't like been making videos all the way through this. There's a lot of books on here that I've never talked about that I read earlier in the year, so this is probably my favorite half that I'm excited for. These are all ones, oh my god, I read that this year. I'm shocked going back and seeing which books I read this year because I thought that was the year before, so I didn't even grab them. Okay, well I guess I'll go get them. I literally forgot about so many of them. I'll always remember the first book that I read in 2022. This one is one that completely broke my heart and I've talked about it multiple times. It's like the first book that I read and I was like sobbing, like actually in a pit of despair after I was reading it. I don't even know if that's an exaggeration because I was really sad. Darling Venom, this book made me feel so much. I didn't read the cover when I went into it, so I was completely blindsided by what occurred and I was so rooting for the beginning, and then I was like, oh. Okay. Certain books just kind of change your life. Kind of a iconic book to start off the year with because it was just like nothing I've ever read before. It is a romance, that's what it is. But that's not really what it is at its core. I feel like it's a book about like grief and love and grief, and my main takeaway is that love is worth the pain that comes with possibly losing someone that you love. And then also, that is even hard to say because that's kind of a hard thing to like accept. The person in this book, it was just like crazy how the people in his life like affected the way that he thought about himself so much that he didn't see like the truth of a lot of things. That one had a real meta moment where there was like a book within a book and it was just amazing. It blew my mind. I was like, this author is a genius. And she was also super nice. She was maybe one of the first authors who like interacted with something that I made about her book, and I was so thrilled when that happened. Next book is the beginning of something magical. The next book that I read was one that I was recommended from one of my friends on Instagram, and so I ended up reading this one. I really loved it and it kind of got me excited about the whole series. It's about a girl who grew up in a prison and she's like the prison healer, so she heals people that come in to the prison and are like come in bad shape. So this is what she's doing for years and years because her family got in trouble with authority for kind of rebelling in certain ways, and then she got dragged into it when she was really young. So everything changes for her this one day when someone comes in to get healed, but then they're not actually coming in to get healed, you know, like they're in disguise as someone else, and everything changes after that. And that was the first book that set off me reading the rest of the series. I am just seeing how good of a reading year I've had so far like in this year, because then I read You Deserve Each Other, and this like changed my outlook on second chance romance books. I actually rave about this one in my second chance romance recommendation video because this one is just so different from many second chance romances. It really like breaks the mold, I feel like, and it also is just so funny. It's so funny and so sweet and just new and inventive, and I love it. I read the second book to The Prison Healer, which was The Gilded Cage. I read this one and I was officially obsessed with the series and couldn't wait for the third book to come out because it wasn't out. Every like trial and circumstance was elevated. All the stakes were raised. It just left me on the edge of my seat. I really recommend this series. There's magic and royalty and rebellion, and it just has all those fun things that you want to see when you read a YA fantasy. So yeah, I recommend it to my core. And there's super cute found family, and it's just, I love it so much. Next up is Love and Other Words. If you like see things about books often, then you probably eventually have seen something about Love and Other Words. This is a second chance romance that's very emotional. I loved it so much. For this one though, I think a lot of people are expecting something that happens and they like wish that people warn them with the trigger warnings. I've just seen people saying that, so I'll just tell you right now. That is something that you should look up for trigger warnings if you get triggered by things. I also just love the color of this book. When I started reading romance books, my bookshelf got extremely more entertaining to look at because all the colors that come with romance books. I wish that fantasy books like did that. Like I wish they used crazy colors. The next book that I read is The Fine Print, and this is actually so cute looking back on these books that I've read because I'm remembering like when I was recommended like all the books, and it's just like reminding me of certain periods of time where like I was just meeting new people through like books and everything and talking about books with people, and they were telling me I should read things. It's really taking me back. This is a walk down memory lane for me. This is a romance that takes place at Disneyland. Like the people work at Disneyland. It was a nice, fun, warm, happy read, and it's like a little ray of sunshine book. There's the grumpy sunshine trope. This wasn't my favorite romance, but I liked it enough to where I would recommend people to give it a shot because I think that it's something that a lot of people would love, and a lot of people do love it. It definitely did make me happy. Next up we have something that a lot of people, it's like a famous romance series. The series I'm referring to is Addicted to You. This like first book, Addicted to You, was so hard for me to read because it's about a sex addict that's like the main character and an alcoholic, and they're basically just enabling each other through pretending that they're dating. They're living together and they could just let each other have these bad habits and addictions. It was really mentally draining and it was super depressing, but there were moments of like growth and just things that were really inspiring and cool to read about. The next books that I read are actually the second and the third one, and then I even went on to the next series and read one of those. The books really just keep getting better in my opinion because it's like so hard at the beginning, and then like the characters grow so much and you just become so proud of them. I grew very fond of all the characters. I do have Ricochet, I just don't have Thrive, and I read Addicted for Now too, which was the third book, and then I read Kiss the Sky, which was the Calloway Sisters series, and it was the first book. So those are all the ones that I read. I really liked them. I just feel like sometimes I get bored of a series if I'm reading it for too long, so I meant to take a break, but then I didn't read any more this year, so maybe I'll dive back into that. Maybe I won't, but I did really enjoy it. I do think it's worth the read. It was just great that now I know what people are talking about. The next books that I read are wait, which one's first? There Are No Saints and There Is No Devil. These are both romances, and they're like super steamy, spicy books. Another thing to know about these books is that the main dude in it is literally a serial killer. Sometimes I really enjoyed these books, and other times I was thoroughly scared. Overall, I think if that concept sounds interesting to you, then you should definitely read them because that's exactly what it is. I do think the writing is good, and I found it interesting. Whenever they were inside of Cole, the dude who is the serial killer's head, I was so unnerved, and I just hated the way he thought. Like, it aggravated me. He really did just kill people when he like felt like they were bothering him or something. Like, he was actually to another level, but at the same time he like wasn't worse than this other serial killer who was like so much more of a terrible person than him. So like in comparison to the other guy, he looks great. He really did. He didn't just kill like senselessly, he killed people for specific reasons, but I say he kind of killed them like medium senselessly because he killed literally a reviewer who left him a bad review. There's other way to handle your feelings. So, end of story. If a serial killer romance sounds interesting to you, these are right up your alley, and like definitely steamy. If you're looking at one that's not steamy, you're out of luck for this one because this one is tons steamy. Also, I do want to clarify that I did like overall I was entertained for most of the parts of these books. It was only when it was like inside of Cole's head and it was like, you know, talking about killing people and stuff that I was like, no. Okay, next up I read a fantasy because I was like, okay, I'm gonna try fantasy again. I read An Ember in the Ashes, and then I went and read the second book too, Torch Against the Night. I really enjoyed these books. They weren't like my favorite fantasy books that I've ever read. Like, I didn't read them and I was like, oh my god, I'm obsessed. But I really enjoyed reading them, and I feel like they're just a great action-filled fantasy. They do have romance in them too, like that's a big subplot, but the action is really like at the front and center. I feel like this is a great one for people to read if that is what they're looking for. I think the world and the concept of it is super cool, and I don't really feel like explaining it because it's kind of a lot, but like fantasy books are so hard to explain. I do recommend these though to people. I feel like they're a really good YA fantasy. I enjoyed them. I really enjoyed them. I was thinking of reading the third one, but then I was like, okay, I was kind of starting to get like done with the worlds by the second book, and I don't think I'm ever gonna jump back into them, but we'll see. You never know. Next, I don't have the physical copy of this, but I read The Rebel by Sophie Lark from the Kingmaker series. I didn't like this book that much. I didn't think it was that interesting. I have read the Brutal Birthright series like last year, and I really liked that series, and I like Sophie Lark's writing. Like, I know she writes really good books, but I didn't really like it that much. Next, I read Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I love this book. It was my first Sally Rooney book ever, and it's the only one I've ever read, and it blew me away. I could not stop reading it at all. I mean, I might have also been procrastinating because I think I had like a paper or something due, but this was amazing. I compared this song in like my Taylor Swift song books video to High Infidelity because there's an affair going on in this book. The main girl in this book, Frances, she begins to be interested in this guy who's like a married dude. It's very interesting. It's also like, it's sad. It's like so many emotions. Sally Rooney has some really interesting writing, and one, she doesn't write quotation marks, which I actually didn't even notice that. Sally Rooney really has nailed like the aspect of analyzing someone else's behavior, like the complexities and nuances of each little situation. It sounds like just the inner workings of a talented individual. Like, as she's writing the thoughts that Frances has, who also was like really young and, you know, hasn't really figured herself out completely yet, hasn't, I don't know, gotten to that place of confidence and security yet, and it's just like, you know, there's a lot going on, but it's very much like in your head, this book. Next, I read The Housekeeper and the Professor. This book is different than any book that I've ever really read. It's a literary fiction. It's about a housekeeper who's taking care of this elderly professor whose memory only lasts like 80 minutes at a time. He has like all these little pieces of paper stapled to his suit or like clipped onto his suit with little reminders of everything. For example, his housekeeper, he'll like draw a little picture of her and her son who like comes to visit, and he'll like write their names on it, so when he wakes up every morning he'll like see them. What I really loved about this book was that the professor lost his memory every 80 minutes, but it still felt like I was discovering more about him as the story went on, and like the relationships were progressing somehow, but it was still like realistic, like he was losing his memory, but it worked. I don't know how that was done, but it was done so well, and it was really a good, nice read. And I always say that this book felt like a hug reading it, because that really is what it felt like. The professor was a math professor, and he's so like math minded and thinks of everything in numbers, and will always tell people like random number facts and equations and things, and he's just like fascinated by numbers, and he sees the world through numbers. It's really beautiful seeing that different perspective on the world through his eyes. Like, it's cool seeing someone, like reading about someone who sees the world through numbers, which is something so far of how I see the world, and seeing the housekeeper as someone who also doesn't see the world through numbers. See the beauty that he sees in the way that he sees it, and just find that, I don't know, it was so nice. I really loved it. The next book that I read, I don't have the physical copy of, but it is The Roommate in the Shameless series. I have not read the other books in the series, but I read this book and I thought it was okay. I didn't love it, didn't hate it. I feel like I overall pretty much enjoyed reading it, but I wouldn't read it again if I hadn't read it, but I knew how much I liked it. That makes sense. This is about a girl who goes and moves far away to move with her best friend who she has a crush on, but he's like, oh, I'm going like on tour with my band, you could live with like my other roommate who's taking my place or something. And she's like, what? I did not know this was gonna happen. So he kind of leaves her high and dry, but then his roommate who ends up being there, she strikes up a romance with him. First like a friendship and then a romance. Plot twist, he's also a porn star, and she figures that out when she's there, and she's like, oh. It's also a book about her like standing up to what's expected of her, making her own path. It's very cool. It's a cool book. But yeah, it just wasn't my favorite. The reason why it wasn't my favorite is because I feel like the spice scenes happened too early. Like, there was not enough tension and like yearning building up to that moment. I feel like I love like a good journey to get to them being together. It just felt like too soon and there wasn't enough tension for me. After that, I read The Problem with Forever and I really loved this book. I wasn't sure how I felt about it in the beginning through reading it. It's like a YA romance. But then by the end, I was like, okay, I love it. It just had a really nice message in it, and honestly, I cannot even remember what that message is, but I just remember thinking that and remembering that it was turned into a 5-star by the end of me reading it. Looking back, I want to give it like a 4-star just because I know it's not one of my favorites, but at the time I was thinking like, oh, this is a 5-star. It's about a girl and a boy who were like in a foster home or an orphanage when they were younger together, and then they got separated by this big like horrible event that happened. And it is not really a second chance romance, but it's like a, I don't know what it is. And this guy who she was at that home with is like at the school. She hasn't seen him in like a bunch of years, but she goes to this new school and he's there. It definitely shows that he's just like really cares for her right away. And I just thought it was really cute and a fun book. The next books I read I also don't have the physical copy of, and that is the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy. I read all of them and I loved them. It was an amazing adventure. I want to read To All the Boys I've Loved Before, or I think that's what it's called. I want to read that now. I just love these books so much. They're YA romances. That show came out about them. I just had a great time. I had a great time reading these, and it really did remind me of just like the embarrassment of growing up. I was just like, wow, that's really brutal, but you know, that's how awkward it is sometimes, just living life, and I really appreciated that. And also, of course, the romance was great. I loved it. Next, I read Today, Tonight, Tomorrow. This was actually when I was starting YouTube, so as you can see, I read a lot of these books recently. If you like academic rivals to lovers and you want a YA romance, this is just the perfect book for you. And I love how it's that line between like competition and really just being low-key obsessed with someone, liking someone. I overall just really loved this book. It wasn't one of my favorites, but it was one that I would recommend to people and I really enjoyed it. The next book I read was The Summer of Broken Rules. This one was so fun. This is an adult romance, but it doesn't have like a bunch of spice in it or anything, so I feel like if you're someone who doesn't really like that, this one's really good to read. The Summer of Broken Rules really does feel like summer when you're reading it. Like, it's such a good vibe and it's just a great time. There's like a game of like mafia murder mystery happening with everyone, and like they're all attending a wedding. The romance between someone from the bridal party and someone from the groom's party. It's like the groom's stepbrother or something, and then the bride's cousin, I think. They form an alliance early on. They both know people on the other side, so when they get the names that the person that they have to kill next, they'll know like that person's routine, where they are. So it was really centered around this game and I just had a great time. I love books centered around games, and that actually reminds me, the last book that I read, Today, Tonight, Tomorrow, also most of it was taking place during this massive game of something similar to mafia mystery murder, where they had like a name and they had to keep taking out people who had that name, and when they got that person out, they got that person's name, and that happened in both of these. And I thought that was kind of crazy that I didn't realize that was going to happen in either of these, and I read them like right next to each other because I've never read a book with that in it before. I loved it and it made me want to play that game so bad, but yeah, I recommend both of these. Also, this one is for the Taylor Swift fans because there are Taylor Swift references in here, and I think the next book, I think it's like Midnights or something, I don't know, but yeah, it's filled with Taylor Swift references. Next, I was still in my summertime reading era, and I read Every Summer After. I really loved this one. If you want an emotional second chance, just gives you what you need if you're looking for a second chance, really. It just fulfills all of that. It also does have that really good summer feeling. It's honestly like, just think about like Love in Other Words, and it's like that same exact type of setup for something. That's my easiest way of like kind of explaining it. People who were friends when they were younger, and then something crazy happened and they grew apart, and so they didn't see each other in years and years, and then something brings the other person back into their life and they rekindle. Looking back on this book, it wasn't like one of my favorite romances I've ever read, but I think I just love second chance so much. Okay, I will finish it off with these Penelope Douglas books that I read, like the first two that I've ever read. If you know, you know with Penelope Douglas, her books are known for being super steamy and just, you know, what else? I don't know. So first I read Birthday Girl and I loved it. I had a great time reading that. That was so much fun. Yeah, I don't know. It was a crazy story, but you know, I enjoyed every second of it. Not every second of it. Sometimes I was like not enjoying it that much. It's definitely not like a book where I'm like, oh my god, I loved it. but I really enjoyed it. Thought it was good. And it's also like honestly kind of funny. It's actually her ex-boyfriend who's cheating on his dad. So if that sounds interesting to you, you should read it. Punk 57, I didn't really like the book that much. I was pretty overwhelmed. Not a fan, but you know, it had its moments. There's like some moments where I was like, oh, okay, but like overall I didn't really like it that much. And that is where I'll leave it off for this video. And yeah, that's part 1 of what I read this year. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun going back and like thinking about all these books that I read. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like and also subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos like this. All right, I will see you in the next one. Bye.